When I turned 70, I threw a party for the family. No one came. That same day, my daughter-in-law posted photos of everyone on a beach vacation. I just smiled. When they came back, I handed her a folder that made her go pale. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and let me know the city you're watching from so I can see how far it travels." I had spent 3 full weeks planning my 70th birthday. It wasn't just another number to me, it felt like a milestone I wanted to mark, surrounded by my son, my grandchildren, and the few close friends I still had nearby. I polished the silverware, set the dining room table with the floral china I'd inherited from my mother, and arranged sunflowers in tall vases along the buffet. I even bought a new dress, deep teal, with pearl buttons, the kind my late husband, Charles, always said made my eyes look brighter. By 4 o'clock that Saturday, the house smelled of roast beef and fresh-baked bread. I checked my phone for the 5th time. No messages, no missed calls. The table was set for 8 place cards written in my neatest hand. Daniel, my son, his wife, Megan, their 2 kids, my sister Helen and her husband, and my oldest friend, Carol. I pictured us laughing, passing platters, retelling old stories. 5 o'clock came. I lit the candles. 6 o'clock. Still no one. I told myself there could be traffic. Maybe they'd decided to surprise me by arriving all together. But the longer the chairs stayed empty, the heavier the silence in the room became. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded louder with every second. At 6:45, I sat down in my spot at the head of the table and stared at the flickering candles. The roast was cooling, the bread losing its warmth. My phone buzzed a notification from Facebook. I opened it without thinking, and there it was. A photo of my entire family, my son, my grandkids, even my sister and her husband standing on a sun-washed boardwalk, all smiling into the camera. Megan, in a wide-brimmed straw hat, had her arm linked with Daniel's grace day. The caption read, "Living our best life at Cape May. So grateful for this amazing family trip." Posted an hour ago. I scrolled through the album. Pictures of them eating ice cream, toes buried in sand, the kids laughing on a carousel. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. Something inside my chest shifted, not a sharp break, but a slow, cold crack, like ice splitting on a winter pond. They hadn't just forgotten. They had planned a trip that overlapped my birthday, and no one had said a word. I set the phone down, afraid my hands might betray how badly they were shaking. The roast sat untouched. I blew out the candles and carried the bread back to the kitchen. Each step felt heavier, slower. I wrapped the cake, a chocolate layer cake with buttercream frosting I'd been perfecting all week, in plastic, and slid it into the fridge. The once festive dining room now looked like a stage after the audience had gone home. Chairs pushed in neatly, tableware gleaming under the overhead light, but the air thick with absence. As I turned off the light, my reflection caught in the dark window. The woman staring back looked smaller than I remembered. For decades, I'd been the one who kept everyone together, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who showed up even when it wasn't convenient. And yet, here I was, standing alone in a dress no one would see. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the house settle into its nighttime creaks. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing a list. Names, dates, little things I'd noticed over the past few years, things that, until that night, I'd brushed aside as accidents or misunderstandings. Now, they looked like pieces of a puzzle I could finally see taking shape. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew one thing: I wouldn't forget this birthday. And neither would they. I woke up the next morning to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains. The air in the house was cool and still, the kind of stillness that makes you notice every creak in the floorboards when you move. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my joints. My birthday dress still hung over the chair where I'd left it last night. I made my way downstairs and set the coffee pot to brew. The kitchen felt bigger than usual, emptier. There were no stray wine glasses from a celebration, no extra chairs pulled up to the table, no lingering scent of perfume from guests, just the faint smell of roast beef from the night before and the cake, still wrapped in the fridge, untouched. I poured my coffee and carried the mug to the dining room. The morning sun lit up the table I'd worked so hard to set. Everything was still in place, except for the candles, now nothing but short stubs. The wax hardened into ripples down the silver holders. I hadn't had the heart to clear it all away last night. The silence was heavy but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a door is closed and locked from the other side. My phone buzzed. A message from Helen, my sister. "Sorry we missed your party. Megan said you weren't feeling up to it, so they planned this trip to cheer everyone up. You should see the kids having fun. We'll celebrate when we get back." I read it twice. My fingers curled tight around the phone. Not feeling up to it? Megan had told them I didn't want a party, that I had agreed to them going on vacation instead. I thought about the look on her face in those beach photos, the wide smile, the way she stood right in the middle of every group shot. She'd made sure I wasn't there, and then she'd spun a story so no one would question it. It wasn't the first time. Last Christmas, 2 days before, Megan had called me in her soft, overly sympathetic voice. "Daniel's been stressed with work. We think it might be best to keep Christmas small this year. Just us and the kids. We'll drop by after the holidays." I'd eaten leftover chicken in front of the television that night. A year before that, I'd missed Emma's kindergarten play because Megan told me it was just for parents. I found out later from Carol, my neighbor, that she'd seen my whole family at the school, Daniel and Megan sitting right in the front row with a camera. The memories started lining up in my mind, each one a small cut I'd shrugged off at the time. Now they formed a pattern, a picture I couldn't ignore. I set the phone down and picked up my mug again, though the coffee had gone cold. The front porch creaked. Carol's familiar knock sounded 2 quick taps, then 1 slower. I opened the door to see her holding a Tupperware of blueberry muffins. "Morning, birthday girl," she said, her eyes soft but searching my face. I forced a smile. "Morning, Carol. Come in." She stepped inside and set the muffins on the counter. "I didn't see any cars out front last night. Thought maybe you went out." I hesitated. "They had other plans." Carol's lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw the pictures," she said finally. "They all went without you?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. "That's low," she muttered. "You've done everything for them, and this is how they treat you?" I shrugged, a small tired motion. "Seems so." Carol stayed for a cup of coffee, chatting about the weather and the early frost forecast. But her presence filled some of the emptiness, just for a while. When she left, she squeezed my hand. "You deserve better, Loretta. Don't let them take your joy." After she was gone, I walked through the house slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the frames on the mantel. Every picture told a story: Daniel as a boy holding his first baseball glove, Charles and I on our wedding day, the grandkids at the pumpkin patch. I thought about Charles. He'd been gone 8 years now. Before he passed, he told me more than once, "This house is yours, Lori. Everything I've worked for, I worked for you." Back then, I believed that would be enough to keep me secure, but he wasn't here to see how quickly loyalty fades. That night, I didn't call Daniel. I didn't text Megan. Instead, I sat at my desk with a notepad and started writing down dates, the missed birthdays, the canceled holidays, the events I was told I couldn't attend. I listed the people who had been there each time, the excuses given, the way I felt. It wasn't about wallowing. It was about remembering. About building something I could look back on and know I hadn't imagined it. The more I wrote, the more the pattern solidified. Megan had been methodical. Each oversight was another step toward pushing me out. And I had let her, thinking I was keeping the peace. By midnight, I had 4 full pages. I folded them neatly and slipped them into a manila folder along with my will, my property deed, and my bank statements. I didn't know exactly what I would do with them yet, but I knew one day soon they would matter. Upstairs, I turned off the light and lay in bed. In the quiet, I thought about how quickly family can turn into strangers, and how sometimes strangers can be more loyal than family. I closed my eyes, not with the restless tossing of the night before, but with a strange, cold clarity settling in my chest. They thought they'd erased me from my own life. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I drove into town early, the sun still low enough to cast long shadows across the 2-lane road. The air was crisp, the kind that carries the smell of wood smoke from somewhere far off. I parked in front of the bank, a brick building I'd been visiting for over 30 years, and walked inside. The teller, a young woman with warm brown eyes, recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. Here for your safe deposit box?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice light. She led me to the small, windowless room where clients could examine their belongings in private. The walls were painted a dull cream, and the single table in the center held the faint scent of polished wood. She unlocked my box and left me alone. I slid the metal drawer out and set it on the table. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it: the property deed, Charles's life insurance documents, the savings bonds, a few pieces of jewelry that had been in my family for generations. I touched the locket Charles had given me on our 15th anniversary, running my thumb over the tiny engraved initials. I checked the documents, reading each date, making sure no changes had been made without my knowledge. The will still reflected the version Charles and I had drawn up years ago, leaving everything to Daniel, with the understanding, or at least the hope, that he would honor my place in this home for the rest of my life. Back then, it had seemed natural, simple. Now, I wasn't so sure. I returned the papers to the box, but I slipped the will into my bag. I would take it to an attorney later that week. Something in me knew it was time to update it. Leaving the bank, I stopped by the park on the way home. The benches were wet with dew, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I sat for a while, watching an elderly couple walk slowly along the path, the man steadying the woman with his arm. I thought about Charles, about the way he'd always reached for my hand without thinking, the way he'd brush a strand of hair from my face when the wind caught it. He'd been my anchor in a way no one else had been. We'd built this life together: the house, the traditions, the tiny routines that only we understood. Losing him had been like losing the map to who I was. I wondered what he'd say if he knew how things had turned out. I could almost hear his voice. "Don't let anyone push you out of your own life, Lori. Stand your ground." I went home and made myself lunch: a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, the kind Charles and I used to eat on rainy afternoons. The familiarity of it was comforting, but it also sharpened the ache in my chest. In the afternoon, I got a call from Helen. Her voice was bright, too bright. "We just got back from Cape May. The kids had the best time. You should have seen Emma collecting seashells. Oh, and Megan found this amazing little seafood place." I let her talk, nodding at the right moments, my responses minimal. She didn't ask about my birthday. I didn't bring it up. When she finally said goodbye, I sat in the quiet, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. That evening, I pulled a cardboard box from the back of my closet. Inside were letters Charles had written to me over the years, some from business trips, others just notes he'd left on the kitchen counter. I read one from the summer of 1989, when Daniel was 10. "Lori, I know you've been tired lately, keeping the house running and looking after everyone. I want you to know I see you. I appreciate you. And when we're old, I promise you'll never have to fight for your place here." Tears blurred the words. He'd meant it. I knew he had, but life had a way of testing promises in ways you could never imagine. By the weekend, I'd made an appointment with a lawyer named Margaret Vaughn. She had a small office above the hardware store and came recommended by a woman from church. On Saturday morning, I walked into her office with my folder. Margaret was in her 60s, with short silver hair and a straightforward manner I liked immediately. I explained the situation in broad strokes, no accusations, just facts. She listened, jotting notes in neat handwriting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to be blunt. If your will leaves everything to your son with no stipulations, you're vulnerable, especially if your daughter-in-law is influencing him." I nodded. "What do you suggest?" "Update the will. You can create a life estate, which would allow you to stay in your home for as long as you live, no matter who technically owns it. You can also direct assets to specific beneficiaries, bypassing anyone you don't trust." The thought of making those changes felt both heavy and liberating. "Let's do it," I said. We spent the next hour going over details. I named a few charities close to my heart, left some keepsakes to friends who had stood by me, and set up the life estate for the house. By the time I left, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. On Sunday, I attended church for the first time in months. Carol sat beside me, and afterward we shared coffee in the fellowship hall. Megan wasn't there, she rarely came, but I noticed Daniel speaking with a few men near the door. When he saw me, his expression flickered with surprise before settling into a polite smile. "Mom," he said, walking over, "didn't expect to see you here." "I thought I'd come," I replied simply. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Listen, Megan's been talking. She thinks it might be time for you to consider downsizing. You know, less to maintain." I held his gaze. "I appreciate the concern, Daniel. But this is my home. I'm not going anywhere." He hesitated, then nodded, but I could tell the conversation wasn't over for him. When I got home, I wrote down every word in my folder. The pattern was no longer subtle. They were circling. That night, as I washed the dinner dishes, I caught my reflection in the dark kitchen window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't just see someone waiting for life to happen to her. I saw someone preparing. The week after my meeting with Margaret, I began to move with a different kind of intention. I still kept my routine's coffee in the morning, tending the roses in the front yard, chatting with Carol over the fence, but beneath it, every choice was deliberate. Every step was part of something bigger. On Tuesday, I went through my desk drawers, sorting papers into neat piles. I shredded anything I didn't need: old utility bills, outdated catalogs, invitations from years past. What remained went into labeled folders: financial, property, legal, personal. I wanted no loose ends. I placed the updated will in a fireproof box under my bed, along with copies of my bank statements and the life estate document. The originals stayed in the safe deposit box, but having duplicates within arm's reach made me feel anchored. Midweek, Carol stopped by with a bag of apples from her cousin's orchard. She noticed the papers spread out across my dining table. "Spring cleaning?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "In a way," I said, smiling faintly. "Just making sure everything's in order." Carol studied me for a moment. "You're not the type to go into a fight without a plan." I chuckled softly. "Let's just say I'm preparing for a conversation I know is coming." By Thursday, the conversation arrived sooner than I'd expected. I was in the kitchen peeling apples for a pie when the phone rang. The caller ID showed Daniel's number. "Mom," he said after the briefest greeting, "Megan thinks it would be good for us to have a family meeting. You know, just to talk about the future. Maybe this weekend?" My knife paused mid-slice. "The future?" "Yeah. Things like the house, your plans, that kind of stuff. We all want what's best for you. What's best for me?" The words felt like a coat 2 sizes, too small, snug with good intentions, but restrictive in all the wrong places. "I'll be here," I said evenly. "Tell me what time." "Saturday afternoon, then." The next 2 days, I sharpened my mind the way you might sharpen a blade. I reviewed my notes, highlighting the most telling patterns. I printed out copies of bank transactions I'd flagged nothing earth-shattering, but enough to raise questions about where money had gone. I even gathered screenshots of social media posts, each time-stamped and cross-referenced with the events I'd supposedly been too tired to attend. Friday night, I sat at the dining table with the folder open, the scent of apples and cinnamon from the baked pie lingering in the air. I thought of Charles, how he would have handled this. He'd have been patient but unyielding, letting the truth speak for itself. Saturday came with a heavy sky. Clouds pressed low over the neighborhood. I dressed simply but neatly: a navy sweater, pressed slacks, the pearl earrings Charles had given me. I wanted no distractions from my words. At 2 o'clock sharp, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway, Megan in the passenger seat. The kids tumbled out first, running up the porch steps, their laughter a bittersweet sound. I hugged them, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and sunscreen, before they darted off to the den to play. Megan's smile was polished, her tone warm but practiced. "Loretta, you look well. We brought some muffins from that bakery you like." "Thank you," I said, taking the box and setting it on the counter. We sat in the living room, Daniel on the couch beside Megan, me in my armchair. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been thinking. The house is a lot for you to take care of. The yard, the upkeep, the bills, it's a lot for anyone, really. We just want you to be comfortable." I nodded, letting the words land. "And your solution?" Megan leaned forward, hands clasped. We thought maybe you could sell the house and move into something smaller. There's a lovely senior community just outside town. You'd have neighbors, activities, no maintenance to worry about. You whine. Her eyes held the kind of sweetness that comes from a recipe you don't trust too much sugar hiding something sour. I folded my hands in my lap. That's thoughtful of you. But I'm curious what would happen to this house if I sold it. Daniel hesitated. Megan answered for him. Well, it would be in your best interest to put the proceeds somewhere safe, of course. We could help manage that. Make sure it lasts. I let a small silence stretch between us before I spoke. This house is more than just walls and a roof to me. It's where I built my life with Charles. It's where Daniel took his first steps. It's where I intend to stay. Megan's smile didn't falter, but I saw the faint tightening around her eyes. Loretta, we're only thinking of you. And I'm thinking of me, I said, my voice calm but edged. Which is why I've already made arrangements. The house is in a life estate. I will live here for the rest of my life. And when I'm gone, it will go exactly where I want it to. That decision is made. Daniel blinked. When did you? A week ago, I said. And while I appreciate your concern, my finances and my living arrangements are not up for negotiation. The room went still. The clock on the mantel ticked audibly in the silence. Finally, Megan sat back. Well, she said lightly. I suppose that's settled then. I smiled faintly. I suppose it is. They stayed for another half hour, the conversation drifting to safer topics: the kids' school, the weather, a new restaurant in town. But the undercurrent was there, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear down the street. I felt no triumph, no smugness. Just the steady certainty that I had drawn a line they couldn't erase. In the kitchen, I cut myself a slice of the apple pie I'd baked. The crust was flaky, the filling warm and sweet. I ate it slowly, each bite a quiet reminder. I wasn't powerless. I was prepared. The days after the family meeting felt strangely calm on the surface, but I could sense the shift beneath. Megan's tone on the phone was still polite, but it had a thinness to it now, like glass stretched too far. On Monday afternoon, I was weeding the front garden when Carol strolled up the walkway. She leaned on the fence and said, "Saw Megan at the market this morning. She didn't see me, but she was talking to that realtor, Greg Adams." I looked up from the soil. Greg Adams? He deals almost exclusively in high-value homes. Carol nodded slowly. They were looking at something on his tablet. He said something about timing the market right. I straightened, brushing dirt from my gloves. Interesting. It wasn't the first time I'd heard whispers about Megan's conversations with people who had no business being involved in my affairs. But now I wasn't just listening, I was documenting. After Carol left, I wrote down the details in my folder, under a new heading, Potential Sale Attempts. That evening, I called Margaret, my lawyer. "I need to know," I said, "if someone could try to list my property without my knowledge." She reassured me. "Not with the life estate in place, Mrs. Harper. But if they can't sell it, they might try to pressure you in other ways." Pressure, I thought. That's Megan's specialty. On Wednesday, I got a call from Helen. "Megan says you've been keeping a lot of things from the family." She seemed concerned. I could almost hear Megan's careful phrasing, planting seeds. "Did she say what things?" I asked. "Just that you've been making changes, and she doesn't understand why you wouldn't involve Daniel." I let a pause hang in the air. "Helen, I've lived long enough to know not everyone needs to be involved in every decision I make. This is my life." The conversation ended politely, but I knew Helen would carry my words back to Megan, and that was fine. Some messages are meant to travel. That Friday, I decided it was time to start gathering my own allies. I invited Carol over for tea and brought out the box of old photo albums. Together, we flipped through the year's holidays, school plays, birthdays, until we reached the more recent years where gaps appeared. "You see this?" I pointed to the album from 3 years ago. "Christmas at their house. Not a single picture of me. I was there, but Megan took them all." Carol frowned. "It's like she's rewriting the family history." "Exactly," I said. "And I have the proof, the albums, the invitations, the texts she sent. I just need the right moment to lay it all out." The right moment came into focus a few days later when I got a group text from Megan. "Family dinner at our place next Saturday. Everyone welcome." I stared at the message. Megan rarely extended invitations like that to me unless there was an angle. Still, I replied simply, "I'll be there." For the rest of the week, I prepared. I made copies of the most telling pages from my folder, the timeline of events, the photographs that showed me excluded, the text messages canceling plans, the overheard conversations. I placed them in a slim envelope, easy to carry, easy to slide across a table if the moment came. I also baked not because I needed to bring anything, but because I found comfort in it. The smell of cinnamon and sugar calmed me, even as my mind replayed what might unfold at that dinner. On Saturday, I arrived at their house precisely on time. Megan greeted me at the door, her smile bright but her eyes scanning me as if looking for signs of weakness. "Come in, Loretta. Everyone's here already," she said. The dining table was set for 10. Helen was there, chatting with Daniel. The kids ran through the living room, squealing. Megan moved easily from guest to guest, topping off drinks, making sure everyone felt welcome. It was a performance, and she was the star. Dinner started pleasantly enough: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. But halfway through, Megan cleared her throat. "I think this is a good time to talk about some family matters," she said, glancing at Daniel. "We all care about each other, and we just want to make sure we're making decisions together." I set down my fork, watching her carefully. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we know you've been making changes. We just wish you'd talk to us first." I smiled faintly. "Daniel, I'm 70 years old. I've been making decisions for myself for a long time. I don't need permission to continue doing so." Megan's voice stayed smooth. "It's just that we're family. Transparency is important. We wouldn't want misunderstandings to cause distance." I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the table. "Speaking of misunderstandings," I said quietly, "I've kept a record of the times I was told I couldn't be part of family events or that I didn't want to be there, which was untrue. Dates, photos, messages, everything is in here." The table went silent. Helen glanced between us. Daniel's brow furrowed. Megan's smile wavered. "Loretta, that's not— It's all dated and documented," I interrupted gently. "And if anyone doubts it, I'm happy to share it with the rest of the family. I've spent years watching a version of me be erased. That ends tonight." Daniel looked at Megan, confusion mixing with something else: doubt. "I'm not here to argue," I continued. "I'm here to make it clear that I will not be moved from my home, I will not be pushed aside, and I will not allow false stories to be told about me without correction." The room stayed quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Helen spoke. "Maybe we should all take some time to think before we talk about this again." Megan nodded stiffly. Of course. Dinner resumed, but the easy flow of conversation was gone. I noticed the way Daniel glanced at me more than once, as if trying to reconcile the version of me he'd been told about with the one sitting in front of him now. When the evening ended, I thanked them for dinner and walked out with my head high. I could feel Megan's eyes on my back, calculating. She wasn't done, but neither was I. The morning after the dinner, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The house felt cooler than usual, the kind of day made for staying in with a pot of coffee and a warm sweater. I settled into my armchair with the newspaper, but my mind kept circling back to the looks exchanged at that table last night. I knew Megan wouldn't let it end there. She was too invested in controlling the story. By mid-afternoon, the first ripple came. Helen called. Her voice was careful, too careful. "Loretta, I just wanted to check on you." Megan seemed upset after last night. I let a small silence stretch. "Upset how?" "She said you've been keeping a record of things and that it's not the whole picture. That maybe you've misunderstood some situations." I almost smiled. Megan was moving fast, seeding doubt before I could. "Helen," I said gently, "my record isn't about interpretation. It's dates, photographs, and direct quotes. Anyone can look at it and decide for themselves." Helen hesitated. "I know. I just don't want this to turn into a bigger rift." "It won't," I said, "as long as people are willing to look at the truth." After we hung up, I called Carol. She didn't mince words. "She's going to start telling people you're forgetful." That you're mixing things up. I've seen it before, it's how some folks ease others out of decisions. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then I'll make sure the truth isn't just in my folder, it's in the hands of people I trust. That week, I made a plan. I chose 5 people: Helen, my cousin Marjorie in Ohio, Carol, my pastor, and a longtime friend of Charles's, Robert. I invited each of them over, one by one, under different pretenses: tea, lunch, catching up. When they came, I showed them pieces of the record. Not the whole thing, just enough to show a pattern. I didn't dramatize, didn't add commentary. I let the evidence speak. Dates, texts, photographs, and the notes I'd taken when others told me what Megan had said. Robert, who'd known Daniel since he was in diapers, leaned back after flipping through a few pages. "Loretta, this is clear as day. She's been isolating you. I'll stand by you if this comes up in public." That was the point, to make sure that if Megan tried to discredit me, I wouldn't be standing alone. On Thursday, I stopped by the church office. Pastor Elaine greeted me with a warm smile, offering me a seat in her small, book-lined office. When I told her what had been happening, she listened without interrupting, her hands folded on the desk. "I believe you," she said finally, "and I'll pray for your protection. But I'll also be ready to speak if anyone questions your clarity or memory." Her support was a quiet anchor in the storm I knew was building. By Saturday, the storm arrived. I was in the grocery store, picking up flour and sugar, when I heard my name in the next aisle. I turned the corner to see Donna from church speaking with another woman I didn't know well. "It's such a shame," Donna was saying. "Megan says Loretta's been, not herself lately, forgetting things, getting confused." The other woman sighed. "I hope she gets the help she needs." They spotted me a second later, their faces flushing. "Loretta," Donna said brightly, "we were just talking about you." I smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "So I heard." Without another word, I picked up my basket and moved on, but my pulse was steady. Megan's tactic was predictable: discredit me so that any future confrontation could be brushed off as the ramblings of someone confused. That afternoon, I wrote down the encounter in my folder, noting the date, time, and exact wording. I also called Margaret, my lawyer. "She's going to try to paint you as incapable," Margaret said. "If you haven't already, get a medical evaluation confirming your cognitive health. That way, if it ever becomes a legal issue, you're covered." It was sound advice. On Monday, I booked an appointment with my doctor. The test came back clear, no signs of memory loss or confusion. I asked for a written statement and added it to my file. Now, if Megan wanted to question my mental state, I had a doctor's signature ready to counter her. The following Sunday, after church, I made my move without even raising my voice. Over coffee in the fellowship hall, I spoke with Helen in a place where others could hear. "I'm glad I saw you," I said. "I wanted to thank you for looking at the records last week. It means a lot to have family willing to see the facts." Helen's eyes widened slightly. She knew the implication. Around us, a few people turned their heads. The seed had been planted, that Helen herself had seen the evidence. By the end of the month, the balance had shifted. Megan still smiled in public, still played the part of the attentive daughter-in-law. But I noticed her scanning the room more often, as if gauging who might be standing with me now. She wasn't wrong to worry, because what she didn't know was that I wasn't aiming for another tense living room showdown. I was setting the stage for a moment she couldn't control in front of people who mattered to both of us, and it was coming sooner than she thought. The invitation came in the mail on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a flyer for lawn services and the electric bill. "Please join us for Emma's piano recital and celebration, afterward hosted by Daniel and Megan." I stood at the kitchen counter, reading it twice. A recital. Perfect. Not because I wanted to embarrass Emma, she was a sweet child, too young to be tangled in any of this, but because this was exactly the kind of event where the extended family and close friends gathered, where Megan would be in hostess mode, relaxed enough to believe she was in control, and where I could, with just the right nudge, let the truth breathe in the open air. For the next 2 weeks, I prepared quietly. I didn't need to collect more evidence. I already had more than enough. What I needed was to place it where the right eyes would see it. I called Carol. "I'll be at the recital," I said. and I think it might be the moment. She didn't ask for details. I'll be there, Loretta. I also rang Robert, the old friend of Charles's. I'd like you to come, I said. Bring that camera you love, the one that takes such sharp photos. He chuckled. You expecting a photo-worthy moment? Let's just say I want a record. In the days leading up to the recital, Megan called once, her voice bright and carefully pleasant. Loretta, we hope you'll be able to come. Emma's been practicing so hard. And afterward we're having a little reception at the community hall, finger foods, music, nothing too formal. I wouldn't miss it, I said. When the day arrived, I dressed simply but neatly, in a soft gray dress and my pearl earrings. The air was crisp, the sun warming the edges of the church steps where the recital would be held. Families milled around the entrance, children clutching sheet music. Inside, the pews filled quickly. I took a seat halfway up the aisle, where I could see the stage and the audience. Carol slipped in beside me. Robert sat a few rows back, his camera bag at his feet. Emma played beautifully, her small hands sure on the keys, her face intent. When she finished, applause filled the space. Megan beamed from her seat, soaking in the admiring glances. Afterward, we walked to the community hall, a bright room strung with fairy lights and set with long tables of sandwiches, fruit platters, and punch bowls. Megan floated from guest to guest, her voice carrying in cheerful bursts. I mingled slowly, making my way toward the table where I knew my allies, Carol, Robert, and a few others were gathered. I made a point of greeting Helen warmly. You made it, she said, almost relieved. Of course, I replied. I wanted to see Emma play. I leaned in just slightly, enough for the nearby guests to hear. And I'm glad you saw the records, Helen. It's good for people to know the facts when there's been confusion. I saw the flicker in her eyes, not anger, but the awareness that others had heard. Around us, conversation paused for a beat. Then I pulled the envelope from my bag, not the thick one, just a smaller set of pages, the clearest examples. A photo from Tommy's birthday where I'd been cropped out despite standing right beside him. The text canceling my presence at Christmas, juxtaposed with a Facebook post showing the gathering without me. The overheard comment at the post office about me funding a trip I hadn't known about. I laid them on the table in front of Carol and Robert. I've been told I'm mistaken, I said, my voice calm. But these are dated, documented, and witnessed. If anyone has a different version of events, I'm happy to compare notes. Robert picked up one page, his brow tightening. Carol looked directly at Megan across the room. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it traveled. Within minutes, I could see the small conversations starting at one table, moving to another, eyes glancing toward me, then toward Megan. She noticed, of course. Her smile became tighter, her movements a little sharper. She approached with Daniel at her side. Loretta, she said, still smiling for the benefit of those within earshot. I wish you'd come to me first before sharing personal family matters like this. I have, I said evenly. Several times. And each time the version that's told afterward doesn't match what happened. So I've decided to make sure the truth isn't hidden. Daniel looked between us, something uncertain in his expression. Mom, I'm not here to argue, I said. Just to ensure that if stories are told, they're complete. That's fair, isn't it? Around us, guests lingered, listening. No one interrupted. Megan's smile didn't crack, but her eyes did. She nodded once, sharply, and moved away, Daniel following. The rest of the reception was quieter. People still chatted, but more than one person came up to me with a squeeze of the hand or a quiet, "I'm glad you spoke up." When I left, the late afternoon sun was spilling gold across the parking lot. Robert caught up with me, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. "I got a few shots," he said. "Not of the papers, but of faces. Sometimes that's just as telling." I smiled. "Keep them safe." Driving home, I felt no gloating. Only a steady, settled feeling like I'd finally anchored my own story in a place where it couldn't be so easily rewritten. Megan would try again, I was sure. But now she knew I wasn't standing alone. And she knew the eyes watching weren't just mine. The phone rang late on a Wednesday evening, just as I was settling in with a book. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. I answered, expecting the usual small talk about the kids. Instead, his voice came clipped. "Mom, we need to talk." I could tell immediately Megan had been at work. Of course, I said evenly. What's on your mind? There was a pause, as if he was choosing his words. I've been hearing some things about you. About what you've been telling people. Megan says you've been showing private family matters to everyone. That's not okay. I leaned back in my chair, letting his words hang in the air a moment before replying. Daniel, I've been showing facts to people who matter because the version of events being told about me is not true. If you're hearing otherwise, I'd suggest you ask for proof. Megan wouldn't lie to me, he said quickly, almost defensively. I let my voice stay calm. I'm not asking you to choose who to believe. I'm asking you to look at the evidence yourself. I have it ready for you any time. He hesitated. I just don't want this to get ugly. It only gets ugly when lies are left to grow, I said softly. We ended the call without resolution, but the message was clear. Megan's new tactic was to paint me as the aggressor, the one airing dirty laundry in public. She wasn't attacking my memory anymore, she was attacking my loyalty to the family. The next day, Carol stopped by with a pie. She leaned against the counter while I sliced it. I ran into Megan at the pharmacy. She was telling Marge you've been stirring up trouble because you're bitter about not getting your way. I smiled faintly. That's her angle now, bitterness. It's easier to dismiss a bitter person than a wronged one. Carol shook her head. You gonna let her spin that? No, I said. But I'm not going to chase her words either. I've learned that the more you defend yourself directly, the more you feed their story. I need a move that shows, not tells. That move came in the form of an unexpected opportunity. On Friday afternoon, Pastor Elaine called. Loretta, we're organizing a Founders' Day gathering next month, honoring longtime members who've contributed to the community. We'd like you to be one of the honorees. You've done so much for the church and the neighborhood. I felt a warmth in my chest. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I saw what it could be, a stage I hadn't asked for, filled with people from all corners of our community. People who knew Megan's version of me, and people who knew mine. I'd be honored, I said. The next few weeks, Megan kept her distance, at least directly. But I heard her work through others. Casual comments at the post office. Hints dropped at the salon. She was painting me as someone who couldn't let go of the past, someone making waves for no reason. I didn't counter any of it publicly. Instead, I kept meeting with my quiet circle, Carol, Robert, Pastor Elaine, and now a few others who had reached out after the recital. I gave them more of the record, so they could see the pattern in full. One evening, Robert came by with an envelope of prints from his camera. These are from the recital, he said. I thought you might like them. We spread them out on the table. In photo after photo, Megan's smile was tight, her eyes darting toward me in the background. In one shot, taken just after I'd laid the papers on the table, Daniel's face was turned toward me, his brow furrowed, the kind of expression that made you question what you thought you knew. These tell a story too, Robert said quietly. I kept those photos close, adding them to my file. Not for revenge, but for clarity. The Friday before Founders' Day, Daniel stopped by unannounced. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. Megan's upset, he began. I'm aware, I said. She says she doesn't know why you're making this so public. I looked at him steadily. Daniel, let me ask you, have you looked at what I've gathered? The texts, the photos, the dates? He shifted. Number Megan says it's just your perspective. I reached for the folder on the hall table and held it out to him. Take it, read it, then decide what's just perspective. He took it reluctantly, as if it were heavier than paper should be. I'll look, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. As he left, I knew this could go either way. He could read it and see the truth, or he could let Megan explain it away before it sank in. But at least the choice was now in his hands. Founders' Day arrived with a cool breeze and a sky so clear it almost looked painted. The community hall was decorated with banners, photos of past events, and tables laden with potluck dishes. I wore a deep blue dress, my pearls, and the locket Charles had given me. When my name was called, I walked to the front. Pastor Elaine spoke warmly about my years of service, organizing food drives, visiting the homebound, maintaining the church gardens. I smiled, thanked her, and turned to the room. I'm grateful for this community. I began. And I'm grateful for the people who stand for truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I've learned lately that stories can be told in many ways, but facts, dates, and the people who've witnessed them, they speak louder than any rumor. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The people who understood. I saw it in their eyes. When I sat down, Carol leaned over. That was perfect. No fire, no shouting, just steady truth. Megan was there, sitting stiffly beside Daniel. She clapped, but her eyes didn't move from me. The balance had shifted again. Not in one dramatic explosion, but in the quiet way a tide changes slowly, steadily, until you realize the shoreline is different than it was before. I left that day knowing the final reckoning was close. Megan had one move left, and so did I. It happened 2 weeks after Founders Day. A letter arrived, not the polite kind, not handwritten. This was thick cream paper in a stark legal envelope. My name and address were typed, the return address from a local law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice, a petition for guardianship, filed with the county court. In plain language, Megan was attempting to have me declared unable to manage my personal affairs, so that Daniel and, by extension, her could take control of my finances, property, and decisions. I sat at the kitchen table, the words swimming for a moment before they steadied. Guardianship. They were trying to put me under legal control while I was very much capable, a move that, if successful, could override even the life estate. I called Margaret immediately. They've made their final move, she said after reading the scanned copy I sent. Loretta, this is serious. But you're in a strong position. You have your doctor's statement, your documentation, and witnesses. We'll fight this, but be prepared. Court is public. Once you win, you'll have a different kind of freedom. Oh? That night, I didn't sleep much. I walked the halls of the house, my hand trailing along the door frames, the furniture Charles and I had chosen together. This was my life they were trying to take, and the thought of Megan sitting in my chair, making decisions in my name, was more than I could bear. I wasn't afraid of court. I was afraid of how far Megan was willing to go. But that fear turned quickly to resolve. If she wanted public, she'd get public. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Margaret and I spent the time preparing. Every piece of my file was copied, tabbed, and placed in order. The doctor's statement was notarized. Robert's photos were printed in large format. Carol, Pastor Elaine, and Helen all agreed to testify if needed. When the day came, the courthouse was buzzing. Small-town cases like this drew more attention than they should have, and by the time I walked in, the hallway outside the courtroom was lined with people. Daniel was there, looking pale. Megan stood beside him, crisp in a tailored suit, her hair perfectly in place. She didn't look at me. Inside, the judge, a woman I'd known casually through church events, called the session to order. Megan's lawyer began, painting a picture of an elderly woman, confused, forgetful, and easily manipulated by outsiders. She spoke of missed events and erratic decisions that were cause for concern. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me, letting her spin her web. When she finished, Margaret stood. Your Honor, my client is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her affairs. We will demonstrate that not only is this petition unfounded, but that it is the culmination of a long pattern of attempts to isolate and discredit her. One by one, the evidence came out. The doctor's statement, the timeline of events, with supporting texts and photographs, the Christmas post without me, matched to the message saying I had canceled, the cropped birthday photo, the overheard comment about a trip I had supposedly funded. When Robert's photographs from the recital were shown, the room shifted. You could feel it. The expressions on Megan's face in those candid moments, the way Daniel looked at me mid-conversation, they told a story without words. Then Carol testified. Calm, clear, unflinching, she recounted the market conversation with the realtor, the gossip at the pharmacy, the things she'd personally seen. Pastor Elaine followed, speaking to my clarity and my role in the community. I've had many conversations with Loretta over the years, she said. There is no confusion in her mind. There is wisdom, and unfortunately, there is also a great deal of hurt caused by the people who should be protecting her. Even Helen, voice trembling, admitted, I believed Megan at first, but after seeing the documents and the dates, I realized I'd been told things that weren't true. When it was my turn, I stood. I didn't look at Megan. I looked at the judge. I'm 70 years old, Your Honor. I raised my son in the house I still live in. I've lived through loss, through hard times, and I've never needed someone to speak for me. What I've needed, lately, is for the truth to be heard. This petition isn't about my well-being. It's about control, and I won't surrender my life to someone else's version of it. When I sat down, the room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. The judge didn't take long. She denied the petition, stating there was clear and convincing evidence that I was fully capable of managing my affairs. But she went further. She turned to Megan and said, "This court cautions against the misuse of legal processes to settle personal grievances. Such actions erode trust and can have lasting consequences." Megan's face didn't change, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her lawyer's folder. Daniel stared at the table. When the gavel fell, I felt something I hadn't in years, not just relief, but vindication. The story wasn't in whispers anymore. It had been laid out, piece by piece, in a room full of people. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local paper were waiting. I didn't seek them out, but I didn't hide either. I simply said, "The truth matters. It always matters." And by the time I got home, the phone was already ringing. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives calling to say they'd heard. They believed me. They were glad I'd stood my ground. I walked through the house that night with lighter steps. This wasn't just my home. It was my proof, my sanctuary, my statement to anyone who thought they could write me out of my own life. Megan would have to live with what she'd done and with the fact that her plan had not only failed, but revealed her for exactly what she was. And me? I'd live exactly as I intended. On my terms. The morning after the hearing, the house felt different. Not in the way a room changes when you move furniture, but in the deeper way a place changes when the weight inside it is lifted. I brewed my coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the light spill across the yard. The roses I'd planted last spring were budding early, tiny bursts of red against the green. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the walls were listening for trouble. The phone rang mid-morning. It was Daniel. His voice was low, almost uncertain. "Mom, I'm sorry." I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the silence before I spoke. "Sorry for what, Daniel?" "For letting it get this far," he said. For not looking at what you gave me before all this." I could hear the strain in his voice. Megan's absence on the other end of the line was noticeable. "I gave you every chance to see the truth," I said evenly. "You chose not to. That's on you." "I know," he said quickly. "And I want to fix things." I let out a slow breath. "You can start by respecting the fact that my life is my own, and by not letting anyone speak for me again." There was a pause. "I can do that," he said. "We didn't make any promises beyond that. Trust isn't rebuilt with one phone call." That afternoon, Carol stopped by with a grocery bag of fresh bread and fruit. She set them on the counter, then turned to me with that knowing smile. "You realize you've got half the town talking, right?" "I've been told," I said, pouring us both coffee. "They're not talking about you the way Megan wanted," she said. "They're talking about how you handled it calm, steady, no mudslinging. That's not easy." "I wasn't calm on the inside," I admitted. She laughed. "Doesn't matter. You looked it on the outside, and that's what she'll never forgive that you didn't break." Over the next week, the visits and calls kept coming. Pastor Elaine dropped off a bouquet from the church garden. Robert brought me a framed print of one of his recital photos, the one where I'm in the background, head high, while Megan's gaze cut sideways. "A reminder," he said, "of the day you stopped being their target and became their problem." Helen came too, looking sheepish. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around her mug. "I should have believed you sooner," she said quietly. "I didn't make it easy for her." "Why didn't you?" "I think I wanted to believe the easier story," she admitted. "It's easier to think someone's just confused than to think someone's being cruel." I nodded. "I understand that, but the easier story isn't always the true one." When she left, she hugged me tightly. I could tell she meant it this time. As for Megan, I didn't see her. Not at the market, not at church, not in passing. Daniel came by once on his own, bringing a basket of groceries. He lingered in the doorway, as if afraid to step too far inside. "Megan's not ready to talk," he said. "That's fine," I said. "I'm not ready to listen." He smiled faintly, then sobered. "She's embarrassed. Everyone's looking at her differently now." "My. They're not looking at her any differently than they should have been all along," I replied. The days found their rhythm again. I tended the garden, went to choir practice, had lunch with friends without checking over my shoulder. But I didn't let go of the file. It stayed in the desk drawer, updated when needed. Not because I expected another attack, but because life had taught me that people rarely change at their core. One quiet afternoon, I sat on the porch with Carol, sipping sweet tea. She leaned back in her chair and said, "So what now? You going to just move on?" "I'll move forward," I said. "Not the same thing. Moving on means pretending it didn't happen. Moving forward means remembering it did and not letting it happen again." She clinked her glass against mine. "That's the Loretta I know." Spring turned to early summer. At church one Sunday, a woman I barely knew approached me after the service. "I just wanted to say, what you did in court? Standing up like that? My sister's going through something similar. I told her your story. She said it gave her courage." I thanked her, but inside, I felt something shift. All this time, I'd thought the fight was just about me keeping my home, my independence. But maybe it was also about showing others that you don't have to let someone rewrite your life. That night, I wrote in my journal. I didn't win because I shouted the loudest. I won because I told the truth. And I refused to stop telling it. I don't know if Megan will ever try again. Maybe she'll settle into her role, pretending none of this happened. Maybe she'll keep her distance entirely. Either way, I'm ready. Because the lesson is simple, and I've lived long enough to know it's the only one that matters. When someone tries to erase you, you don't beg to be written back in. You pick up the pen yourself. It was a mild August morning when I realized I hadn't thought about Megan in days. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the light filter through the maple trees. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle from the trellis Charles and I had built years ago. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, and the sound was oddly comforting. The quiet was different now, not the tense silence of waiting for the next move, but the settled calm that comes when you've faced the storm and come out standing. The guardianship petition was over. The whispers had faded. Life had returned to its small rhythms, tending the garden, baking bread for Sunday socials, writing letters to old friends. And yet, I carried the memory of what happened like a stone in my pocket, not heavy enough to weigh me down, but solid enough to remind me it was real. I'd learned a great deal in the past year. First, that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slam doors. Sometimes it wears a smile, pours you tea, and asks about your health while quietly setting a trap. Second, that you don't have to match someone's cruelty with cruelty to win. You can fight with proof, with calm, with patience, and that kind of fight leaves a mark they can't wash off. And finally, that standing alone is often an illusion. Once you start telling the truth, you find others who have been waiting to hear it. I didn't want to live in anger toward Megan. Anger is a fire that eats everything it touches, including the person holding it. But forgiveness, well, forgiveness is different. It doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean inviting the person back into your trust. It means you let go of the rope in the tug of war they keep pulling on. I've let go of the rope. Daniel visits now, sometimes with the kids. We don't talk about the court case. He doesn't mention Megan much, and I don't ask. We focus on lighter things, Emma's piano, Tommy's baseball games, the way the dogs still chews the furniture when no one's looking. It's not perfect, but it's something. The file, my folder of evidence, still sits in the desk drawer. I don't need to look at it often, but I won't throw it away. Not because I expect another attack, but because it's a record of the truth. And truth, once documented, is a kind of armor. One afternoon, Carol and I were walking back from the market when we passed a young woman sitting on her porch, crying quietly. We stopped, asked if she was all right. She told us, in halting words, about how her brother's wife had convinced the family to cut her out of a small inheritance, said she wouldn't use it wisely, and how powerless she felt to change their minds. I listened, and then I said, "Start writing it down. Dates, words, what was said, and by whom. Save every message, every photo. Don't argue with them yet, just build your truth. And when the time comes, put it where it can't be ignored. She nodded slowly, and I saw the first spark of resolve in her eyes. That's when it struck me, maybe my story wasn't just a defense. Maybe it was a template, a quiet way to fight back against the slow kind of erasure that too many people endure. That night I wrote in my journal, "It's not enough to survive betrayal. You have to learn from it, so you never stand in the same place twice." The summer passed gently. I canned peaches, repaired the loose railing on the back steps, hosted a small dinner for friends, the kind where you laugh until your sides ache and no one looks at the clock. Megan stayed in her corner of the world. I heard bits and pieces that she was keeping busy, that she'd taken on more volunteer work at the school. I didn't care to know more. I had no interest in keeping her in my story any longer than necessary. On the first cool morning of September, I walked through the garden, running my fingers over the last of the zinnias. I thought about Charles, about how proud he'd be that I'd kept the house, not just the building, but the home we'd made. And I thought about something my grandmother once told me when I was young. When people show you who they are, don't paint over it, frame it and remember. I've framed this chapter of my life, not to hang on the wall, but to keep in my mind. A reminder that my worth doesn't come from who includes me in their plans, but from the life I've built and the truth I hold. So, here's what I would tell anyone listening, anyone who's felt the sting of betrayal from people who should have been your shelter. Don't rush to prove yourself to those determined to misunderstand you. Don't waste your breath trying to convince a liar they're wrong. Instead, gather your truth quietly, hold it steady, and when the moment comes, lay it down where the whole room can see it. Then walk away knowing you didn't just win the argument, you kept your dignity intact. Because in the end, they can take your seat at the table, they can crop you out of the photograph, they can even try to put your name on a legal petition, but they cannot erase the truth you've kept safe. And that truth? That's yours forever.